A soldier stands in the snow. His fingers are black with frostbite. His uniform is thin. It's designed for summer. Around him, thousands of men are freezing to death, dying from cold, from hunger, from disease. It's December 1941. The German army has advanced 9,000 kilometers into Russia, but they are now stopped, frozen in place. Literally and figuratively, the Russian counteroffensive has begun. German soldiers are being pushed back. This is the moment everything changed. This is where the outcome of the war was decided. Not at Stalingrad, not at Berlin, but here. In the winter of 1941, Nazi Germany had conquered France in 6 weeks, had defeated every army in Europe, but Russia defeated them. The Soviet Union stopped the German advance, and from that moment on, Germany was losing. The war would only last 4 more years, but the outcome was decided in the winter of 1941. Today, we're going to explore 15 reasons why Hitler lost the Eastern Front. 15 mistakes, 15 miscalculations, 15 decisions that cost him the war. If you're interested in World War II, military history, strategy and tactics, how decisions change outcomes, and the fascinating story of the Eastern Front, subscribe to Surprising. Every week we explore historical turning points. We examine military strategies and their consequences. We discuss what could have been different. We analyze how wars are won and lost. Subscribe now so you don't miss our next video on history and military science. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And thanks for watching. This is the story of how Hitler lost the war, how his mistakes doomed Nazi Germany. Reason 15. Hitler's decision to pause, the advance. 2 months that cost Germany the war. In July 1941, the German army was unstoppable, moving at incredible speed. They were only 350 kilometers from Moscow. 3 weeks away, maybe less. The Russians were in chaos. Their army was being destroyed. Their defenses were collapsing. It was the best opportunity Germany would ever have to take Moscow. But Hitler made a decision. He ordered the advance to stop and wanted to consolidate the gains, to secure the flanks, to eliminate the pockets of Soviet resistance. His generals protested, furiously. They wanted to continue, to drive on Moscow, but Hitler overruled them. He was the Führer. His word was law. The advance paused. For 2 months, those 2 months were catastrophic. They cost Germany everything. The pause allowed the Russians to regroup, to build defenses, to bring in reinforcements. By the time the Germans resumed their advance in September, Moscow was prepared. By the time they tried again, winter was approaching. By the time they reached the gates of Moscow, it was too late. 2 months cost Germany the war. Reason 14. Underestimating the Russian winter, a force more powerful than any army. Hitler believed the war would be over in weeks, months at most, so he didn't prepare for winter. The German army had no winter equipment, no proper clothing, no insulated uniforms, no heaters. Soldiers froze to death, by the thousands, by the tens of thousands. Frostbite was worse than battle wounds. Soldiers' fingers turned black and fell off. Soldiers' toes turned black and fell off. Soldiers' genitals froze solid. It was a nightmare, an apocalypse. Soldiers dying from cold. The Russian winter killed more German soldiers than Russian bullets. But Hitler hadn't prepared, because he was arrogant, because he was confident, because he believed in his own mythology. The winter of 1941 was brutally cold. Temperatures dropped to -30 degrees. That's -34 degrees Fahrenheit. Deadly cold. Inescapable cold. The German army wasn't equipped for it, wasn't prepared for it, wasn't ready for it. And millions of soldiers died. Reason 13. Relying on captured equipment. 80% of vehicles were French. Germany's logistics were terrible. A constant problem. An ongoing nightmare. The German army used 80% French vehicles, captured from France after the conquest. These vehicles were designed for French roads, for French climate, for French conditions, not for the frozen steppes of Russia, not for 1,000-kilometer supply lines. Maintaining these vehicles was a nightmare. Parts were incompatible, repairs were impossible. German mechanics couldn't fix French vehicles. They didn't have the right tools. Vehicles broke down constantly, froze in the winter, got stuck in mud. The supply lines collapsed. Soldiers starved. Soldiers went without ammunition. Soldiers were out of fuel. literally out of fuel. The German army moved on horses, millions of horses, 500,000 horses. Horses froze to death. Horses starved to death. Horses couldn't pull the heavy supplies. The logistics nightmare destroyed the German war effort. Reason 12. Declaring war on America. The biggest strategic mistake in history. Hitler didn't have to declare war on the United States. The US had declared war on Japan after Pearl Harbor, but not on Germany. Germany was not at war with America, not yet, but Hitler declared war anyway, deliberately, intentionally. It was the biggest strategic mistake in history. The United States had the largest industrial capacity in the world. It could produce more tanks than Germany, more planes, more ships, more weapons. It could produce more of everything. Hitler was now fighting a war against an industrial superpower. The United States could replace every tank Germany destroyed. The United States could build more airplanes than Germany could shoot down. The United States had access to resources from around the world, and Hitler had made himself an enemy of this superpower. It was insanity, pure insanity. Reason 11. American aid to the Soviet Union. Russia equipped with American equipment. The United States sent massive amounts of aid to the Soviet Union. 400,000 jeeps and trucks, 14,000 airplanes, 13,000 tanks, 4.5 million tons of food. The food saved Russia from starvation. Without it, Russia would have starved. Without American equipment, Russia couldn't have equipped its armies. Without American trucks, Russia couldn't have transported its supplies. There's a saying about World War II. It was fought with American equipment and Russian men. It's absolutely true. Russia won the war on American resources. Soviet General Georgy Zhukov admitted it. In his memoirs, he wrote that Russia couldn't have continued the war without American aid. Stalin said privately that without America, Russia would have lost. The Soviet leaders knew the truth. America was essential. But if America wasn't at war with Germany, this aid wouldn't have been sent. If America wasn't an enemy, America was a neutral power. Neutral powers don't send military aid. But Germany made America an enemy, and America sent Russia everything. Reason 10. Not winning the support of Eastern Europeans. Allies turned into enemies. The people of Eastern Europe hated the Soviet Union. They hated Stalin. They hated communism. They hated the Soviets. The Ukrainians had suffered a horrific famine only 8 years earlier. In 1932 and 1933, Stalin's policies had caused 5 million Ukrainians to starve to death. It was called the Holodomor, the death by hunger. The Ukrainians remembered. They were traumatized. They were furious. When the Germans invaded in 1941, some Ukrainians actually welcomed them. They brought gifts, salt, bread. They thought the Germans would free them, but the Germans treated them terribly, brutally, genocidally. The Germans killed up to 11 million Eastern Europeans during the war. They abducted 8 million more for slave labor. They raped. They looted. They massacred. They committed atrocities. The Ukrainians became enemies. Instead of allies, they became resistors. If the Germans had treated them well, millions could have fought for Germany. Millions could have provided supplies, provided food, provided labor. Instead, the Germans made enemies of them. Reason 9. The failure to take Moscow. The Soviet capital remained a symbol of resistance. Moscow was the capital. It was the heart of the Soviet Union. If Moscow had fallen, it would have been a catastrophic blow to Soviet morale. Communications would have been severed. Transportation would have been disrupted. The government would have had to relocate, would have had to flee east. It might have been the beginning of the end for Russia. But the Germans didn't take Moscow. They got close, very close, within 8 kilometers of the city, but they didn't take it. The failure was devastating. It showed that Germany was not invincible. It showed that the German army could be stopped. It gave the Russians hope that they could win, and that hope was contagious. It spread through the army, through the nation. Reason 8. Poor planning for a long war. Prepared for victory in weeks, not for years. Hitler assumed the war would be over in weeks, months at most. So he didn't plan for a long war, didn't stockpile supplies, didn't increase production. The German economy wasn't on a war footing, wasn't producing at maximum capacity. Hitler thought victory was guaranteed, so there was no need to prepare seriously. But the war wasn't over in weeks. It went on for years, And Germany wasn't prepared for years. Its economy couldn't sustain a long war. The Soviet Union, by contrast, went on a full war footing immediately. Soviet factories worked around the clock. Tank production increased five-fold from 1940 to 1942. Soviet production ramped up. German production couldn't keep pace. By 1942, the Soviets were producing more weapons than Germany. Germany was losing the industrial war, and without American supplies, that would have been catastrophic. But Germany didn't have American supplies. Germany only had German production. And German production wasn't enough. Reason 7. Overextended supply lines. Supplies couldn't reach the front. The German army advanced thousands of kilometers into Russia, but supplies had to be transported from Germany, all the way to the front. The distances were enormous. Thousands of kilometers. Supplies had to be transported by rail, by truck, by horse. The supply lines were stretched to breaking point. Soldiers ran out of food. Soldiers ran out of ammunition. Soldiers ran out of fuel. Tanks sat immobilized because there was no fuel for them. Artillery units ran out of shells. Infantry units ran out of ammunition. Soldiers starved. They ate their horses. They ate each other in some cases. The supply lines killed Germany. The distances were just too great. Reason 6. Treating Russians as subhumans. Ideology over strategy. Hitler believed Russians were subhuman. Untermensch. He believed they were inferior, genetically inferior, intellectually inferior. So he planned to exterminate most of them, to kill over 100 million Russians. This ideology influenced strategy. It made Germany treat prisoners of war terribly. German soldiers murdered Soviet prisoners by the millions. Prisoners weren't fed, weren't sheltered, weren't treated as human. They were starved to death, frozen to death, worked to death. Millions of Soviet prisoners died in German captivity. But this brutality had strategic consequences. It meant Russian soldiers would fight to the death. They knew capture meant death, so they fought harder, fought longer. They had nothing to lose. They were dead men either way. If Germany had treated prisoners humanely, many might have surrendered. Many might have agreed to work for Germany, to help Germany. But the ideology of racial superiority poisoned the strategy. Reason 5. Focusing on Ukraine instead of Moscow. Chasing resources instead of victory. After the initial pause, Hitler decided not to focus on Moscow. Instead, he wanted to focus on Ukraine and the oil fields of the Caucasus. He wanted resources, oil, food, wealth. But this meant diverting forces from Moscow. Means spreading the army thinner. Means not concentrating force where it mattered most. Moscow was the capital. Taking it would have been devastating psychologically. But Hitler was thinking about resources, about long-term strategy. Instead of going for the kill blow, he went for resources. It was a strategic error. It gave Russia time to prepare Moscow's defenses. It allowed Russia to bring in reinforcements, to strengthen the garrison. By the time Germany focused back on Moscow, it was too late. Reason 4. Not cooperating with Japan. Missing an opportunity for a two-front war. Germany and Japan were allies. On paper, but they didn't cooperate effectively. No shared intelligence, no shared equipment, no coordinated strategy. The most obvious way to cooperate would have been to attack Russia from both sides. Germany from the west, Japan from the east. Russia couldn't have defended both fronts. It would have been impossible. The Russians saved Moscow in 1941 by bringing in troops from the east. They brought in Siberian divisions, experienced, winter-hardened troops. If Japan had been attacking in the east at the same time, these troops wouldn't have been available. Moscow would have fallen. But Japan didn't attack. Germany and Japan didn't coordinate. Germany fought Russia alone, while Japan fought China alone. Reason 3. Insufficient preparation for combined arms warfare. Tanks without infantry support. The German army was revolutionary. It pioneered blitzkrieg, lightning war, fast-moving tanks, supported by air cover, supported by infantry. It was effective. It defeated France quickly. It shocked Europe. But the Soviet Union had learned lessons from defending against Germany and Finland. The Soviets developed tactics to defeat tanks, anti-tank guns, tank traps, infantry ambushes. The Germans couldn't just send tanks forward without support. The Soviets were tough fighters. They fought from trenches. They used natural defenses. German losses increased as the war went on. Soviet tactics improved. German tactics became less effective. By 1942, Germany was losing men and equipment faster than it could replace them. Reason 2. Underestimating Soviet production. Facing an enemy that got stronger over time. Germany assumed it would destroy the Soviet industrial base quickly, destroy the factories, destroy the capacity to make weapons. But the Soviets moved their factories east, beyond the Ural Mountains. They built new factories in the east, built them quickly, built them in secret. Soviet production didn't collapse. It increased. Tank production increased. Airplane production increased. Weapons production increased. Meanwhile, German production couldn't keep up. Germany was losing the arms race, losing the industrial war. Every year that passed, Germany got weaker and Russia got stronger. Reason 1. Fundamental underestimation of Russian determination. The unconquerable will to fight. Perhaps the most fundamental mistake was underestimating Russian determination. Hitler believed the Soviets would collapse quickly, that the state was rotten, that one push would bring it crashing down. But the Soviet Union didn't collapse. The Russians fought on. Despite losses, despite defeats, despite horror, the Russians had been through worse. The purges under Stalin, the famines. The Soviets knew what defeat meant. It meant death. Death for everyone. So they fought. They fought harder than any other people. They fought with desperation, with fury, with a will to survive. The Germans underestimated this. They thought the Russians would give up, but the Russians never gave up.